Hello guys, welcome again. In this video, we are going to explore the two main types of arguments in logic, which are deductive and inductive arguments. So what is deductive argument? A deductive argument is one that claims, or deductive argument is an argument if you assume that the premise is true, then the conclusion must also be true. In other words, it is impossible for a conclusion to be false if the premises are true. That's why we say that deductive reasoning or deductive argument provides certainty and involves necessary reasoning. Deductive argument has its own characteristic. The first one is certainty. The conclusion is guaranteed if the premises are true. And in terms of structure, deductive argument typically follows a syllogistic format or syllogistic format. That means two premises leading to a conclusion. Let's see an example. If we say that all philosophers are critical thinkers and Socrates is a philosopher, therefore Socrates is a critical thinker. In this argument, if both premises are accepted as true, that means premise 1 and premise 2, it is impossible for Socrates not to be a critical thinker. If all philosophers are critical thinkers and Socrates is a philosopher, there is nothing that hinders from Socrates being a critical thinker. So the conclusion follows with absolute certainty from the premises. That's why we said that deductive argument is a matter of certainty. And let's add some other example. If we say that all African footballers are blacks, Messi is an African footballer, it follows that Messi is black. Here again, if we accept the premises are true, that means premise 1 as well as premise 2, it is impossible for Messi to not black. If all African footballers are blacks and Messi is from Africa or African footballer, it follows that Messi is black. And the conclusion is a necessary outcome of the premise, or the conclusion necessarily follows from the premises. And when we proceed to inductive arguments, unlike deductive arguments, inductive arguments claim that if the premises are true, then the conclusion is likely to be true, but not guaranteed. That means the conclusion can be true or false, or the conclusion has a probability of being true or false. And this type of reasoning involves probabilistic thinking. That means the premise provides evidence that makes the conclusion probable but not certain. So as a characteristics, inductive argument has the characteristics of probability. In contrary to deductive argument, as I have said earlier, deductive argument has a characteristic of certainty, but inductive argument has a characteristic of probability. That means the conclusion is supported by the premise, but it's not guaranteed. This is actually the main difference that exists between inductive argument and deductive argument. So, deductive argument, or in case of deductive argument, if you assume that the premise is true, it is impossible for the conclusion to be false. While in case of inductive argument, if you assume that the premise is true, it is possible for the conclusion to be true or false, or probable for the conclusion to be true or false. So, the relationship or the inferential claim that exists between premise and conclusion in case of deductive argument is a matter of certainty, while the inferential claim or the reasoning process that exists between premise and conclusion in case of inductive argument is a matter of probability. And let's see examples for inductive argument. For example, if you say that most African leaders are blacks, Mandela is an African leader, therefore probably Mandela is black. While it is likely that Mandela was black based on the premises, it is not impossible that he might not be, or he might not be a black. That means the conclusion has a probability, or Mandela has a probability to be black or white. Because we said that most is not all in the premise part. And the conclusion is probable rather than certain. And let's see the second example. Almost all women are mammals. Hanan is a woman. Hence, or therefore, Hanan is a mammal. Here in this example also, while it is likely true that Hanan is a mammal, still it's not guaranteed. Almost all is not to mean that all. The conclusion follows from the premise with some degrees of probability, but leaves some room for exceptions. So, as a summary, or to summarize, understanding the difference between deductive and inductive argument is crucial for effective reasoning. And deductive argument provides certainty, while inductive argument offers probability. While deductive arguments leads to conclusions that are necessarily true if the premises are true, in the reverse, inductive argument suggests conclusions that are probable based on the premises. If you define deductive and inductive arguments in such a way, now let's proceed to how can we distinguish, or how can we differentiate deductive and inductive arguments. The main difference between deductive and inductive argument lies in the strength of inferential claim. In simple terms, it is about how strongly the conclusion is claimed to follow from the premise. As I have said earlier, deductive argument asserts that the conclusion necessarily follows from the premise, while inductive argument suggests that the conclusion is likely follows, but not with absolute certainty. Underline this. So what are the key factors that should have to be considered when differentiating arguments or interpreted arguments as deductive and inductive? The first one is occurrence of special indicator words, or the presence of this word signals or indicates the arguer's level of certainty regarding the conclusion. For example, if the arguer uses certain here under indicator words like certainly, necessarily, absolutely, definitely, those words indicate arguers have a higher level of certainty regarding the conclusion. For example, if we say that all mammals are warm-blooded and a whale is a mammal, therefore it is necessarily true that a whale is warm-blooded. Here, the word necessarily refers to arguer level of certainty regarding the conclusion is high or certain, or the use of necessarily suggests the presence of a deductive argument, as the conclusion must follow from the premise. That's why we said that the occurrence of special indicator words is one factor for differentiating or distinguishing deductive arguments from inductive arguments. And there are also inductive argument indicator words that are probable, like, reasonable to conclude, and etc. For example, if we say that most birds migrate south for the winter, therefore it is likely that this bird migrates south. Here, the word likely in this argument indicates that the conclusion is not guaranteed. It's not certain. It's not absolute. So it's suggesting an inductive argument. However, while these indicator words can guide us for distinguishing deductive and inductive argument, we must be cautious because at times or sometimes arguers may use strong language for rhetorical effect rather than to indicate the logical structure of their argument. And the second key factor that we should consider when we differentiating inductive and deductive argument is actual strength of the inferential link. That means the link between premise and conclusion. So let's see an example. For example, for deductive argument, we can say that all squares are rectangles. This shape is a square, therefore this shape is a rectangle. In this argument, the conclusion this shape is a rectangle necessarily follows with strict necessity. Or the conclusion this shape is a rectangle follows with strict necessity from the premise. So if the premises are all true, that are this one and this one, the conclusion must also be true. Whereas, let's see an example of inductive argument. Most dogs are friendly. Max is a dog, therefore Max is probably friendly. Here, in this example, the conclusion Max is probably friendly, it is probable, but not guaranteed. Or the conclusion follows from the premises with some degree of likelihood, not certainty. And occasionally, an argument may lack clear indicator words, and the conclusion may not follow necessarily or probably from the premise. So this leads us to our third factor that we should have to have considered when you're differentiating deductive and inductive arguments. This is character or form of argumentation. That means the overall character or form of argumentation used by the arguer. Let's see an example of deductive form or overall character or form of argumentation of deductive arguments. For instance, if you say that all humans are mortal, Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. This is actually the classic example of a deductive form where the conclusion must be true if the premises are true. If all humans are mortal and Socrates is a human, there is no doubt that Socrates is immortal. Whereas, when we see examples of inductive form, here in a survey, 80% of college students reported that they prefer online classes. Therefore, most college students likely prefer online classes. This type of argument is structured inductively. It suggests a conclusion based on observed evidence, but doesn't guarantee it. So, in conclusion, differentiating between deductive and inductive argument involves looking at special indicator words first, assessing the strength of the inferential link second, and considering the overall forms of an argument. Remember that while these factors can guide us, many arguments in everyday language may not fit neatly into one category or the other. Thank you for joining me today. If you find this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and share with your thoughts and put your thoughts in comments below. Understanding the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning will enhance your critical thinking skills and improve your ability to analyze arguments effectively. Until next time, keep questioning and exploring the fascinating world of logic.